Good afternoon, and welcome to today's Adweek webinar, Maximize Holiday Campaign Results with CTV and AI. Today's webinar is sponsored by TV Scientific. I'm Annie Hildebrand, Senior Director of Production at the Adweek Branded Content Studio, and I'll be your host. I want to take a minute up top just to let folks know what to expect from today's presentation. We have a webinar presentation with a wonderful lineup of speakers, and after which we should have some time for the audience Q&A. So if you have any questions for our speaker during the webinar, feel free to ask those. You can find the Q&A tool right beneath the video window on your screen, and we'll get to as many questions as possible. It's also not too late to invite friends or colleagues to this webinar. If you think anyone would enjoy this presentation, we encourage you to share the link with them. We sent out a reminder email about 15 minutes ago, and you can find a link to the registration page in that email. Feel free to share that with folks who would be interested. And if they can't join us live, this is being recorded and they can take a look at the on-demand version. That on-demand version is also open for any of you to take a look at. You'll get an email following the webinar about 3:30 p.m. Eastern, and that will have a link to look at the on-demand version. Finally, if you'd like a PDF of today's slide deck, you can also find that in the event resources area. It's underneath the video window on your screen. But I'm very excited to kick things off, so I want to introduce you to our speakers today. We are joined by Rebecca Miller. Rebecca leads corporate marketing at TV Scientific, overseeing brand, content, and communication strategy. She develops programs to educate growth and performance marketers on driving measurable outcomes through performance TV. Prior to joining TV Scientific, Rebecca held marketing roles at Splash and Paylocity with a focus on brand and corporate strategy. We are also joined by Tim Sheets. Tim oversees advertiser performance and marketplace strategy at TV Scientific, where he leads cross-functional efforts around research, experimentation, and feature adoption. He began his ad tech career at OpenX, helping launch one of the first real-time bidding exchanges. He later led global AOR engagements at Accenture's media and creative agency and managed business development and partnerships at ZipRecruiter. And finally, we also have Matt Janis. Matt is helping performance marketers drive measurable outcomes through performance TV. Since joining the company in 2021, he's held leadership roles across performance operations, affiliate, and yield, bringing a deep understanding of campaign optimization and platform efficiency. Prior to TV Scientific, Matt led monetization strategy at the Los Angeles Times and managed programmatic revenue at OpenX. We're very excited to have all of you here today. Very happy to pass things over to Rebecca to get things started. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you so much for having us, and thanks everyone for joining us today to talk about this very important topic. Before we jump into the content, we'll go through a quick agenda. So first, we'll want to talk about this shift in channel activity that we're seeing this year, bringing CTV to the forefront. Then we'll get into why flexibility will be so important this year and how marketers are staying agile with the help of AI. And finally, we'll talk about how adopting an outcome-driven mindset can support better measurement for you this year. And then, of course, as Annie mentioned, we'll wrap with a Q&A. We should have plenty of time. So today's conversation is based on a report that we actually just published today. It's the 2025 Holiday Advertising Trends Report. And we surveyed almost 700 marketers and learned some really interesting things. So one thing, for example, is that you can see here, budgets are increasing. Across the board, 57% of marketers are getting more money this year. And for CTV specifically, budgets are increasing for more than 58% of marketers. And that's a pretty significant shift from the 41% who said the same thing last year. But of course, with more budget comes more expectations, more pressure. You all know how that goes, I'm sure. We also asked them to tell us what channels they're using for advertising this holiday season. And CTV, as Annie alluded to, ended up as the #2 channel this year, up from #3 last year. And I think, this is really indicative of how marketers are rethinking the channels that'll give them accountability and the outcomes that they actually need this year to meet those expectations, especially during the holiday season, and lighten the load a little bit for them as well. CTV is going to be big this year, so I want to have us start by talking about why that is So I'm going to kick it over to Matt first. Why are more marketers turning to CTV? Why do you think they're getting so excited about this channel?
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. Really, a few reasons pop into mind pretty quickly. At the highest level, if you just think about CTV as a medium compared to other digital channels that marketers are buying, it's really undoubtedly the most powerful full funnel medium in the kind of traditional sense that we think about the marketing funnel. It gives marketers the ability to build awareness of their brand, cultivate interest in products and services, and drive outcomes that can be measured really in a way that no other single channel can. I think most of us recognize areas that traditional channels can kind of touch, and those three different areas are different parts of the funnel. But when thinking about CTV, just the way that the medium is, you're able to do things just differently than you are in other channels where you may need a combination of others to achieve the same end. Additionally, when you think about just the format itself, you're really talking about non-skippable full audio, 15, 30, even 60-second ads that run in premium, full episodic content on the biggest screen in the house. This is just simply different from something like a social feed, for example, which can oftentimes be noisy, saturated, and really varying levels of engagement. So I think that at the highest level, the thing that we see that marketers are most interested in when they're thinking about getting involved is just how to take advantage of a format that's just so different and so much more powerful than what they've been doing in the past. But really where I want to spend the majority of time is actually something that some marketers are starting to learn more and more that we've observed kind of over time. And really what that is that not only does CTV drive, standalone value for marketers in a way to measure, TV versus other channels that marketers are using, but really, unlike any other channel, it positively influences all the other channels in your mix in a really unique way. You may have heard a term, halo effect or something to that in that regard in the past, but it's really important to think about what that actually is. So if you think about, the user experience for consuming television and other media, it sounds obvious when I say it, but not everyone thinks about it right away. When a user sees an ad for a brand or product they're interested on television, they don't really engage on the same device like you might through other channels. So I know that there's some inventory partners or some streaming services trying to get people to engage on the TV. But for the most part, what you're going to see is a consumer going to a secondary device to try to interact with the brand. That may be like a Google search or something like that. And so just right away, due to the nature of the medium, you've engaged the user in a different way. And what's really interesting about that is that brands can really start to understand and measure the different consumer touch points that provide a clear picture for brands on what we really like to refer to as a customer's path to purchase. As we know with most traditional channels, the focus is really trying to get that final ad in front of a consumer so the consumer clicks on it and that channel gets all the last click attribution credit. That's something that I think is pretty familiar for everyone. What happens with that is a resulting incentive for these channels to actually get involved in like a race to the bottom. You're really just trying to find and fight for that last click, and you're not really thinking about what benefits the marketer in an overall sense. So it doesn't really have to be zero sum between your channels, and in fact, it isn't when you get into the data. So what I think that we're seeing and what we're hearing from brands is that CTV is more of a unifying medium that empowers brands to build and measure more of a synergized marketing strategy rather than trying to focus on, is this better than that, and how do I use it in that regard? So those are kind of the things that we're hearing, Rebecca, on why people are so excited to continue to increase their investment in CTV.
Yeah. So if I'm hearing you right, less noise, more control, better synergy. These are all things that CTV has over other digital channels, or why marketers are getting excited about CTV. One of the things that we learned in our report is that there's still, even with the right channels in place, there's still a lot of uncertainty kind of heading into this holiday season. And you can see here on the slide, more than half of marketers 54.2% to be exact, said they're worried that market conditions will hurt consumer spend and thus campaign performance this year. And when there's that kind of uncertainty, you really have to think about how your strategy can be flexible. One other thing we learned is that the majority of marketers, 96.5%, said they're prepared to make those adjustments as needed to their holiday advertising strategy to really meet, those changing needs of the consumer this year. So you can see here specifically, 53.7% are prepared to rework messaging, to better resonate with maybe those deal-seeking shoppers. 56.1% will change the timing of their promotions to match consumer demand and when activity is happening. And then 58.9% are prepared to shift budgets between channels based on what's actually working. Tim, I know you have some thoughts on this. Do you want to talk about what kinds of agile moves you're seeing brands make with their CTV campaign specifically?
Yes, for sure, Rebecca. It's unbelievable. As TV has exploded onto the digital media scene with internet-connected platforms, we see it's now just as agile, if not more agile, than other digital channels. This slide shows it, Rebecca. Marketers want to and are able to modify things like channel mix, audience targeting, and creative messaging with a click of a button on CTV now. And this agility means there can be a benefit in launching campaigns even earlier, so you have time to collect data and see what's working. You aren't locked into a single strategy. So our survey data backs this up. We see that marketers are planning to launch their holiday campaigns this year in August or September, and it was in September and October last year. So marketers are getting a jump on it and using this extra time to ensure the campaigns are optimized for peak performance when the holidays roll around.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one other thing that we wanted to talk about too, obviously, is that with everything moving so fast as they do this time of year, things like AI become even more necessary. And in our report, 58.3% said they will use predictive AI to inform targeting and optimization in their holiday campaigns, which you actually could argue feels a little low. How are you guys seeing marketers use AI to actually stay agile and optimize in real time? And do you guys have any examples that you can share to kind of illustrate this?
I was going to say the same thing, Rebecca. I'm honestly surprised adoption of AI is not higher than 58%. We're so excited about how AI can boost the results of marketing spend. And in fact, CTV has enabled big screen TV to become a channel where predictive AI and machine learning optimization tactics are the rule, not the exception anymore. The technology helps teams anticipate when and where to spend at a speed and efficiency that humans can't match. We should be able to predict the relevance of a given product or service for a household or consumer before an ad is even served. And I'd also mention that we're seeing marketers use in-platform A/B testing to optimize creative variance mid-campaign with big results. Matt, what do you think?
Nice. Matt, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, and in addition to what you said, Tim, I think there's a couple areas that we've seen specifically with customers and how they're using it that I thought would be interesting to kind of touch on here. And really at the highest level, it comes back to incorporating a variety of signals that are just simply too difficult for a human or a team of humans to be able to incorporate and ingest and make buying decisions on. And really what it comes down to is assessing the value of the next dollar you're spending, right? That's what you're getting down to when you're thinking about the power of AI. One example that we've seen with marketers is measuring the time from CTV ad exposure to website visit and really making real-time adjustments to their buying behavior across different consumer profiles, time of day, things like that, and creating a feedback loop to really more clearly understand and action on how different customer segments may engage with your brand. So that's just an example of something you're really able to do real time, even intraday, and figure out who's engaging with your brand and how, and really measure it down to the second with how that's happening from ad exposure to an event being measured. So pretty cool what we've seen there. If we broaden out a little bit, depending on the goal of specific campaigns and where you may be within the flight of your campaign, a marketer may also choose to initially tune their buying, to prefer building a broader cohort of potential customer sets with lower frequency and some more awareness messaging in their creative, and then quickly pivot to dialing that focus into driving purchase behavior, as maybe a sale approaches in your business, or creating some feeling of scarcity or FOMO with the consumer and your brand, and really trying to drive that lower funnel outcome. So folks are also utilizing the power of this signal to kind of build out the length and kind of strategy within their campaign to drive to a particular event that may bring a lot of value to their business. So different customer cohorts that brands are looking at, maybe in different places in the purchase funnel at different times, and managing those buying efforts with kind of legacy targeting capabilities and managing that on a human level is just really, really difficult. And it doesn't compete with what you can do with AI technology.
Nice, thank you. So we've covered how marketers are staying agile, things like shifting budgets, using AI to optimize in real time. I think agility is more than just reacting quickly. I mean, it's obviously that, but I think it also means like knowing what to optimize for, how to measure appropriately. And I think that's where things get a little bit messy, and our data is showing that as well. Almost 60% of marketers say that performance is their primary goal for CTV. But then when we ask them to actually rank their KPIs in order of importance for them, reach, frequency, and lift are still ranked the top three. So like really those upper funnel metrics. So there's a bit of a disconnect there. Matt, can you talk a little bit about what you think is causing that disconnect?
Yeah, I think, just thinking about where we're at in the industry, it's still very new, but there's enough information out there that people are kind of starting to understand what TV can do. And so when I think about it, reach and frequency have long been associated with TV ad buying, right? For a long time now. If we go back to linear and even the beginning of what was happening on CTV, those are kind of more the traditional metrics that I think are just comfortable for people to think about. They're very straightforward. Perhaps people have been building models around them already, so it just feels a little bit more natural. But sometimes old habits can die hard, and it can be a little intimidating to think about what else you can do with a channel. So certainly, reach and frequency are important things to track, but they also give a pretty incomplete view into how a campaign might be performing. Lift, I think, is actually very important and can be used in a variety of ways. But what we see is that it's often, either misunderstood or misapplied when a customer is trying to think about how to use it. So, the fact that marketers can now measure and optimize performance on CTV has clearly made it to the minds of the broader industry. And you see that reflected in some of the data that you're putting up here. But what I would say is at an individual company or marketer level, the depth of experience with what metrics they can or should be looking at, coupled with how to use them, is really where you see that variance. So I think the combination of those two things is really what's leading to maybe a disconnect between folks being really interested in measuring and saying that's really important to them, but then also not knowing exactly what that means. And I think one additional thing that kind of leads to that, if we go back to where we are in the industry, is really that there's just variability in the effectiveness of different measurement and attribution tools in the market. I think as the industry starts to mature a little bit, more standardization will take shape. And so it'll just be a little bit more clear to marketers exactly what they should be measuring and how they should be thinking about it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think obviously the answer is it depends, right? Because everyone has different goals. Everyone has, different things that they're working toward during the holiday season, depending on what kind of company you're with and whatnot. But what do you think are some tangible steps that marketers can take to kind of like shift to an outcome-driven mindset? And or do you have any examples of like how more outcome-driven marketers are measuring success this year? Like what kinds of metrics are they looking at more generally?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best place to start is just kind of what metrics you may be measuring through some other digital channels that you're used to. Now, I will say you've got to look at them maybe in a different way, but I think that's a good place to start. So if you're thinking about, leads for your business, website visits, lower funnel things like purchases and sales, or app installs, depending on the kind of business that you are. ROAS is actually really interesting. We see a lot of confusion between kind of intra and inter-channel ROAS measurement. So what is the ROAS of the particular channel you're buying? And then also how does it, work within the whole ecosystem of what you're looking at? So I recommend folks really get to ground truth on what that means for them and what's really important. But what we've seen is people really start to, underneath that kind of, higher level metrics that they can start to measure, start to do really interesting things with building strategies around, new versus returning customers, for example. So it's maybe not that you just want one or the other, but how are you going to build a strategy and integrate data to understand, what that looks like for each one of those customer types. And, similarly, initial cost per acquisition tends to be like the first thing that people think about. But lifetime value, as we all know, as marketers, becomes really, really important. And you've got to start to kind of think about not only what happens right here in the moment, but what sort of customers, are engaging with your business over the long term and how you can maximize that value. So those are some of the things that pop out top of mind. But I think one thing that I neglected to kind of get into in the beginning that I'd like to revisit a little is really just around the concept of measuring lift. So like I said before, I really do see, major improvements in strategy when folks really start to understand and apply lift in an effective way. But what I see oftentimes, a mistake that folks are making, are marketers are attempting to utilize kind of like what I would consider a moment in time or snapshot incrementality result to determine whether CTV is incremental to their current strategy. Instead, I realize that that's tempting, but instead the reality is that incrementality is most impactful when you assess it at the strategy level for what you're trying to do with a mix of marketing channels over time and across customer segments. Like I try to be maybe a little bit silly with folks sometimes, but somebody who comes and says, I want to spend $25,000 over the course of 28 days, and you prove that TV is incremental to what we do forever in everything that we could ever do. And that obviously sounds silly, but it does take a little bit of courage to break out of that and start to build a strategy that's over time looking at how different channels together and different creative strategies, different inventory you're buying, whatever it is that you're doing, can kind of lead to incrementality measurement over time and understanding how to model your business off of that. So it does take a pretty big flip in the script, so to speak. But I think if you're someone who's looking at how to build a durable business over time, you've got to get your head up out of just the how do I drive one sale right now? So that's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we wanted to keep this as much under 30 minutes as we could for all of you. But I know we do have some questions. So I'm going to bring Annie back up to help moderate that, if you wouldn't mind, Annie.
Yeah, wonderful. And thank you to the three of you for that the discussion and presentation. That was very insightful. But as Rebecca said, yes, we're going to jump into some audience questions. We'll try to get to spend the next 5 to 10 minutes going through questions. So if you have a question for our speakers, you can ask them using the Q&A tool that's right under the video window on your screen. And if we don't get to your question, these will be forwarded over to the folks at TV Scientific, so they'll have the opportunity to follow up offline with an answer. But before we dive into the Q&A, just a couple reminders. As I said before, today's webinar is being recorded and it will be available on demand later this afternoon. We'll be emailing everyone a link to that recording. And then finally, if you want a copy of today's slides, you can find those in the event resources area on your screen. On the last slide in there, there's a couple links, including one to that holiday report that has been referenced here. So if you want to access that, that's a great place where you'll be able to. But I think it's time for some questions. So the first one that I want to dive into is about kind of the timing of these holiday campaigns, which from an ad week perspective is always very interesting because when these are starting and when people are talking about it is truly shifting. So I love that there was some data on that. But this question is, what is the risk of waiting too long to activate? And then how early is too early?
Yeah, I can jump in on that and kind of echo something that Tim mentioned in the beginning, which is that time affords you the ability to try out, different strategies, and that's important. So I would say that while it's never too late, you're going to maximize value the earlier that you start. So three things that you can kind of think about that just kind of popped in my head here are, how do different creatives perform? Are there different calls to action that may, trigger different behavior in your audiences? That may take some time to test and figure out before you come into the main event, let's say to the holiday season. Another one is, dialing in the integration. I mentioned a minute ago something like new versus returning customers. You're going to want to make sure that however you're integrated, you're passing the right signal so that the optimization technology can take that into account and make sure it's making the best buying decisions for you. And then the third one goes back to what I talked about in the beginning is really figuring out what that customer journey looks like for you, because you really want to be able to drive towards the most efficient customer journey you can amongst your channel mix, driving up to the holiday season. So I do think you want a little bit of time in order to do that. So certainly it's never too late. But also on the other end, it's never too early, right? The sooner the better to start to gather those learnings.
That's great. Tim, do you have anything else to add?
Thank you.
Now, is there a world where we could see an advertiser being like, 2025 holiday spending, also, we're going to start our 2026 holiday campaign now? That's what I would like to see. I think that would be very bold. Different kind of A/B testing.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it feels like the way to think about something like that is just, it's good to have something as a point in time in the future and just try to work backwards from it. I mean, I think that kind of sounds obvious, but what we see quite often is people are so busy and businesses are moving so fast that oftentimes the decisions that folks are making are to satisfy something for today or this next week, or maybe even the next month. So to your point, it's important to kind of think about what you want to be, like where you want to be down the line, even further down in the future. And if you end up getting there in a little different way than you thought, that's okay. But you've got to kind of set the foundation again for like how you're going to measure things, what's important to you. Sometimes a customer wants to go live and then they realize they got to take a month to build a creative that really fits the standards of another team in their company. Like those silly things can sometimes, get drawn out, and then you're not able to execute as fast as you want. So, for a variety of reasons, I think even if you want to go way into the future, like you just said, I think that might be smart to kind of start there and work your way backwards.
Yeah, and there are always the things that come up where you're like, great, timing is going to shift. That's wonderful. Okay, another question for you all. What advice do you have for marketers who want to move away from upper funnel metrics but aren't sure where to start with outcome-based measurement?
I'm happy to jump on that one too, which is really just to get started. I think sometimes, when we're talking about all of the things that a marketer can do with TV, it might feel a little daunting, or, hey, what I'm hearing is that the modeling that I've done for the last 7 years may not be relevant for what the future of TV is going to be, things like that. But what I would say is just start somewhere. Try to identify a single metric that's important for you. Start buying ads, start trying to optimize towards it, and just understand what that data looks like. I think one of the most important things, again, that we see, and I feel like this is now the third time I'm mentioning it, is just understanding what that path to purchase is and how your consumers are engaging once TV enters the mix, and what that data signal looks like for you and your teams to try to learn and understand what you want to do with your strategy. So just get started, identify one thing, and try not to feel like you have to do everything at once in a month's time, as fast as you can, because that's just going to be really difficult.
Great. All right, let's move to an AI question. Whenever there's AI as a topic, people have a lot of questions, so I think this will be a really interesting one. Sorry, it disappeared from my screen. Here we go. What types of campaign decisions are best handled by AI versus handled manually?
Happy to jump in here, Annie. I think I'm mostly going to reiterate a couple of points we made earlier in the webinar, But I think if I'd first just acknowledge we see a ton of promise in AI and agentic AI experiences to improve the efficiency and accuracy of media planning and ad operations. I know there's a lot of companies out there getting started in this area, but it still feels to us like very much early innings there. And it's an area that we see innovation happening, but I'm just not sure if this is a year that's going to be much of an impact for most marketers. But the areas where we do see AI having a big impact this year is, like we mentioned, transactional buying decisions, where you can rely on ML models to predict the relevance of products for consumers or households. This is just stuff that it's just not possible for humans to do impression level decisioning on buy and don't buy decisions today. And then I also mentioned creative versioning. So especially for small teams, if you can rely on agentic AI platforms to help create different versions of your creative and test different messaging and creative in market.
All right, great. There's a lot of good questions in here, so I'm going to move on to the next one. All right, from this person, I understand that the growing trend of investments in CTV is a general trend overall based on all the points mentioned. However, I would like to understand what differentiates the holiday season from the rest of the year.
Oh, that's a very good question. I think from my point of view, I'll be interested, Tim and Rebecca, if you have a view here as well. But for me, it's just that it feels like the most saturated time with advertising from, competitors and things like that. There's so many buying decisions that people are having to make, and folks are just inundated with different deals and what they can buy and how to make sure that they're not missing out on the thing that they need to get their kid or their partner or something like that. So I think that to me is the biggest thing about holiday season is it's just so saturated with advertising. So that's where it really becomes important that you build a strategy leading up to it to differentiate yourself from the rest of the noise. So at the highest level, that's kind of what resonates for me.
I think it's also interesting too, because there are other points of the year where, we have a lot of buying decisions happening too, but like something about the holidays where it's like, there's a specific time frame for it, but it's in the grand scheme of things, it's a large time frame, right? Like you're looking at like, kind of the start of things with like Black Friday, Cyber Monday, right? But then you're like running all the way through like the rest of the year before that even. So it's like very saturated, but in a bigger time frame. So there's like a lot of stuff happening. I think you could make the argument that like other times of the year, are just as critical, right? Like you've got like back to school and like other major holiday shopping holidays. But yeah, I just wanted to call that out too.
It's a period of a ton of spend. Like all three of us have an opinion on this one, right? There's a lot happening. And so it's really important. You're thinking, we hear from marketers all the time that CTV is driving growth in other channels, as Matt's mentioned. So now's the time to think, hey, if you can pump money into CTV and drive more branded search results, this is the time of year to do it.
Thank you so much for that. That was super interesting to listen to. And I'm also looking at some of these other questions that I'm excited to get to. Okay, so the next one I want to ask, what are the best ways to scale your spend on CTV while still staying efficient? Knowing like obviously there will be some efficiency lost.
Now, the first thing I think of here is making sure you're exploring different ways, different pools of consumers to go after and different ways to reach them. So if your campaign is too highly targeted and you've shown your message and you've reached the efficiency peak within your current campaign, think about some more expanding your guardrails a little bit and exploring other areas. And then you can theoretically continue finding ways to be more efficient in those different areas. Looks like you're on mute now.
Thank you. I think that's exactly right, Tim. And just to add on to that, it may sound obvious, but I think you've got to zoom out a little bit and think about kind of trends over time. Instead of saying, just week over week or day over day for every strategy, like how is that working in an efficiency, point of view? Because you're going to kind of lose the forest for the trees, so to speak. So we do find that being able to zoom out a little bit and look at how things are performing over time in a more aggregated sense is a better way to try to think about scale while maintaining efficiency. Because sometimes that day over day or week over week view that oftentimes I think is driven by some of those last touch channels and our experience with those, I think can sometimes hurt your view on what's happening with TV's impact on your business.
All right, great. Next up is what are some effective programs you recommend for buying CTV inventory, either programmatically or directly?
Is there an obvious answer to this question?
It's a softball. It's an audience question, so feel free.
I mean, like this, we would recommend asking questions about the platforms that you can buy CTV. Ask questions about performance orientation and transparency, how they're going to help you partner for success, so you have shared goals. So, of course, TV Scientific is one of those platforms, but I think my point of view would be just know the right questions to ask, and there's a handful of platforms out there for you to explore.
Yeah,
great.
And I think,
go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I think there's one other thing that you kind of mentioned there, Tim, that I think is really important is just when you think about transparency, there's a lot of ways that people can talk about it. But for me, it's just like, what is the platform saying that it's doing? How is it sharing data with you that allows you to make the decision rather than trying to convince you? And how is it working to kind of make you feel like you understand how to incorporate it into what you're doing rather than just saying it's better than something else, right? I think it's that sort of shift in mentality. I've found there to be a number of those platforms that do that, but also those that are doing something a little different. So try to win with focusing on partnerships that are transparent, where you understand exactly what you're buying and the outcomes that are being driven by TV.
Great. Helpful things for people to keep in mind. I think this is going to be our last question, but everyone in the audience, we got some really good questions, so really appreciate those. If you do have other questions, you can put them in the Q&A tool, and we'll make sure that our speakers get those. But for our last question, where am I? Sorry. In your opinion, what formats would be interesting and are still beginning to be explored in this type of investment?
I know my thought, Tim. It looks like you may have one too. For me, it's around sports and live sports. I think, that's one of the areas that is still so interesting that I don't know if we've quite cracked as far as folks understanding how to think about it with performance versus the fact that you're getting like a live potential format with. So for example, let's say I watch a lot of soccer. You can get ads that are showing while the sport is still playing. Formats like that are kind of accompanying content rather than within a break, I think to me are really, really interesting. And streaming platforms are trying to figure out what that looks like to not distract the viewers from the main content, but also provide a lot of value for the advertisers. So things around live sports or live events, to me, I think are really interesting.
I agree, Matt. I don't think I have anything to add.
Yeah, I feel like sports we're constantly seeing some innovation happening there. Okay, that's the time that we have for questions. What a wonderful webinar. Thank you to our audience for submitting those and to our wonderful speakers for the presentation, but also the discussion at the end. I also want to thank our sponsor today, TV Scientific. Just some final reminders. There is the PDF of the presentation slides that you can download in the event resources area. And if you enjoyed this webinar and want to see what other upcoming webinars that we have, be sure to check out the Adweek webinar calendar to learn more about those events. You can see that at adweek.com/webinars. Again, a big thank you to Rebecca, Tim, and Matt. Really enjoyed this discussion. Thank you to our audience for joining. And we look forward to seeing everyone at the next Adweek webinar. Thanks, everyone.